Welcome to Taiwan Talk. I'm Sheree Felice, and this week I'm joined by Jim Hu, an artist and designer who has developed a 3D weaving technique and woven himself into the fashion industry. Listen in as we discuss the future of his designs and artistic expression. Hi, Jim. How are you?
Good.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you specialize in?
Well, my background is fashion designer. That's what I was trained for. I had a BA course in London. After graduation, I felt a bit like fashion. I still like fashion, but I am more comfortable to be called as someone who is anti-fashion. But it's not like saying no to fashion. It's more like we should think about those things we feel suspicious, and we should rethink a lot of things happening in fashion. Those more. And ever since I graduated, I have been developing 3D weaving, which was the technique I used in my graduation work.
So where did you study?
Central St. Martin in London.
Okay. And did you study specifically to be a fashion designer?
No, actually. When I just arrived in London, I didn't have a solid plan. It was more like I wanted to actually escape from Taiwan because I was quite tired back then. And I was thinking about maybe I can just use the portfolio I had already to apply for a graphic design course, and which won't be too difficult for me. But then I lost my laptop, which if you are doing graphic design, then most of your things will be stored in your computer. And I lost, maybe 99% of the portfolio for a graphic designer. So then I have to prepare a new portfolio and apply a new course. So then after a round of hard work, I got into the fashion course.
Okay. Before you started, did you have any experience designing clothing?
T-shirts maybe, but just like graphic T-shirts with graphic elements. Yeah, that's all.
What steps did you need to take to become a fashion designer?
The things I'm going to say is only going to be representative to my own point. But to me, it's very important that you know how to cut and sew and how to construct fabrics into a piece of garment. It's a bit like some people would, maybe like in the film industry, some people would say, okay, if you are going to be a director, you need to know how to shoot. You need to know how to write scripts, those kind of things. And I think I'm holding a bit of similar viewpoint when it comes to fashion.
Okay,
yeah.
So did you learn that specifically at school, or did you teach yourself how to sew and make clothes?
I think it's a bit both. In my school, it's quite different from other schools. We don't teach that much of techniques and how to construct a garment, those kind of knowledge directly. But then tutors and also like your peers, we all hold like very high standard of how things should be achieved. So you kind of have to push yourself through the process.
So you call yourself an anti-fashion fashion designer.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, sure. Anti-fashion has not been known by many people. I would say a lot of people nowadays, they will say, oh, I like fashion. But then I feel like their knowledge about fashion is mostly fed by those fashion magazines. And those fashion magazines are mostly very commercial. Informations they could get, for readers, they could get is a bit like soft or hard advertisement. It's kind of like hidden in those magazines. And to me, that's not representing what fashion is really about. It's more about like helping those multinational companies to sell their products or letting consumers to adopt the value they want them to believe. And I think this is quite different from my point of view.
So, in your point of view, what is fashion all about?
Well, I would say, I think like for us who recognize ourselves as anti-fashion designers was that in school you do feel like fashion is very costly. You have to make those garments, but a lot of times they are not actually helping the war. That's one thing. They're not helping the war directly. Some people will say, oh, fashion is just about a beautiful dream or something like that. But it's not quite like that to my experience. And there's a lot of like labor issues in a lot of big companies inside the design studio. A lot of design are done by interns and not by the chief directors. But I know that that's important to have someone who controls the direction, but interns are not credited, and a lot of times they are treated as somewhat disposable. And I think that's also harmful to the industry as well. That's also one thing. And if you only read those magazines, or if you only receive fashion information from those mainstream magazines, then you won't be able to know these things behind the scene. Also, there's something else. I think it's getting a bit harsh, but it's about, say, cultural colonization, those kind of stuff. Like in Taiwan, a lot of people say, oh, I like fashion. Then by default, they like those multinational brands, no matter what that is, or no matter what they are being presented to. But it's different. When we were in school, we have the confidence to criticize freely about, I don't like this designer because of this, then that. If you are trained as a designer, then in the process, you will know how things are formed, so as the thought, the motif of your thinking. I would say for multinationals, it's not actually so challenging, the motif or the concept they are presenting. It's more like business. It's more like forming something like, oh, if you use our product, then you will be better. And I think that's also not so good. You're kind of like using other people's weakness. Like if you don't use our product, you're not cool, or those kind of emotion. So let's go back to what is fashion about to me. It's simply that how do people verify each? I think it's about how people recognize each, and how do you see yourself by using, let's say, clothes as a media.
So I'd like to talk about your 3D woven technique. Could you explain to the audience what this technique is and why you decided to develop it?
Regular waving is just like pulling strings or fibers from two directions, just basically X and Y. And what I did is add another axis, Z. But it gets more complicated because then you have to manage even more, let's say, joining points or where strings have to meet. And in the early stage, I was able to do things like cube, which is just pulling strings straight enough. So the final object would be woven, would be done. I want to be able to use this technique to make something that with complicated shape. Maybe not so complicated, but I want to make curves or curved surface. So I kept working on that. And even nowadays, I'm still refining this technique.
I've heard that your technique, you call it she. Can you tell me why?
She is X and I. So X is like two strings goes across each other. So it's like regular woven pieces. And if you add another axis, which is Z, then just add another I. So that's the graphic understanding of it. But in Chinese, it's also a word for fiber, for strings. So that's also, the explanation of it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Tell me, who are some of your influences?
If I have to say that designers that have been influential to me, then in fashion particularly, then I would say maybe Issey Miyake, Yohji Yamamoto, and Maison Martin Margiela, and my mentor, Kei Kagami.
What advice would you give to aspiring young designers who want to work in the fashion industry, or artists who want to develop their own artistic expression and technique? What advice would you give to them?
I think a lot of people would say work hard or, seize chances and those kinds of... But I think these are all very well known already. So I would like to say, I think it's important, especially in Taiwan, that don't copy and don't pretend.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much for coming in. And I look forward to seeing more of your designs.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of Taiwan Talk. I'd like to thank Jim again for joining me. If you'd like to check out some of Jim's designs and discover his 3D weaving technique, head to onemoredimension.net or go to Instagram at one_more_dimension. Don't forget to tune in next week for an all-new episode of Taiwan Talk. And as always, remember to take care of yourselves. I'm Sheree Felice.